Shalom, weirdos and witches. It is I, Keats Ross, the host of the PRAGMAGICK Podcast, a podcast trying to discover the confluence between the creative process and metaphysics. As you may have known if you follow me on Twitter or on YouTube, this episode has already premiered. However, it premiered during a birthday live stream on YouTube, sandwiched between an off-the-cuff introduction, a pre-recorded introduction, and questions being answered via the live chat at the end. So I wanted to give this episode its very own special audio version, which you're listening to now. I recommend checking out the live stream while you're there. Please follow PRAGMAGICK on YouTube. The video should be encased in the show notes below. Also, you'll get my off-the-cuff remarks post that initial conversation here with Thomas Sheridan. Thomas Sheridan was such a gentleman, truly a brilliant, enigmatic figure. I'm really excited. I got to dig deep with him about the psychological and philosophical ramifications of hexing, 8-circuit bending audiomancy weirdness and high strangeness when it comes to electromagnetic and analog magic. And my favorite part was the deep discussion about mental health. It was good hearing him clarify some of his more incendiary statements that he's had on Facebook. And I'm really happy we got to dig in as a kind of one-on-one with someone who struggles with it personally and someone who's been affected by someone struggling with it negatively. If you are already a patron on patreon.com/pragmagic, you already know all this stuff. You already heard the full unedited chat, and I've got more stuff coming for you for just $1 a month. Subscribe to the YouTube. Please subscribe, like, share, wherever. I hate saying that, but hey, how else are we going to haunt on? And what do? Well, the only way to survive long after we're dead is to haunt on. Thomas Sheridan, I'm very excited to speak with you. I know we've been trying to do this for quite some time, so thank you for taking the time out.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. No, thank you for asking.
You know, one of the major things, just to jump into it, I think the crux of why I wanted to speak with you is about hexing.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it too, in my, in my purveyance of the quote unquote great work, you've come across it a bunch. And something that's always been kind of weird for me is the psychological ramifications of hexing somebody. And I thought maybe you could speak a little bit about that.
Well, I don't like it for lots of reasons. I think that, firstly, it distracts from you developing yourself spiritually by connecting yourself to an exterior force rather than trying to, I don't know, develop a kind of a sense of samadhi or a kind of sense of self-awareness. A hex is almost like an act of violence. Right. I mean, the last thing you should really do. I'm not saying there's anything you shouldn't do it. I mean, it's like someone comes to punch you. Maybe sometimes punching them back is okay, but there's also other aspects to. There's almost like a quantum entanglement element to it. You're sort of permanently connected to that individual or family or whatever. When you've done it, you've actually created an energetic link that's pretty intense. And if it was done under a state of hatred or vindictiveness or that kind of real, your nervous system has been charged up that much, well, that's going to be a very difficult thing to undo. Now, I have a very old book on Scottish curses and hexing, and the advice it gives at the end, it gives lots of examples of why you shouldn't do it, but not from like a Christian viewpoint or anything. It's actually quite prosaic in how it talks about it. But it says that, and I thought it was a fantastic point. This book was like written in the 1920s or something. They said, if you hex somebody during a height of hatred or vengeance or anything like that, well, that state will eventually go in you. You'll eventually forget about it. And then you may have lost that hatred, lost that dark negative energy you had towards the other person. But meanwhile, the other person is still having to live with the hex that you placed upon them.
Right.
And within Scottish, I mean, although I'm not specifically in one school as such, I'm fascinated by folk magic. And I think folk magic does stand the test of time because it's been a gigantic laboratory that's run for thousands of years all over the world. And the the person who wrote the book, the author, said that excuse me, I just coughed. The person who wrote the book, I'm fine, I'm back. The person who wrote the book said that it had been shown that it does pass from generation to generation. And
so it's like imprinted in like a genetic code almost.
Yeah, or maybe the nervous system. We don't really fully understand what consciousness is even, you know, so it may be something along those lines.
Right.
In terms of how consciousness is passed on genetically even. I mean, there's aspects of that to it, which there probably is, I'm sure, at some level. And why should children and ancestors be punished for crimes that someone had done in the past?
Yeah.
And I think that's a very good argument. And even if it's not true, and I mean, I know a lot, I speak to a lot of occultists, and some say, oh, that's true in some cases, but they said if you calm yourself down and hex them, like months later, it won't happen. But if you hex them in the moment of sheer hatred and vengeance, it will. So there's different schools of thought on it, but there's a genuine assumption that it can happen, and that's probably one of the ethical reasons not to do it.
I think, you know, big thing for me is, yeah, like I was mentioning, the psychological ramifications of baneful magic, that someone carrying around that much hatred and them thinking that they can affect negatively the, you know, trajectory of somebody else is kind of a scary place to be in.
Yeah, there's also the element of, I mean, guilt, genuine guilt. I mean, when you're younger, you're generally, you know, you're full of piss and vinegar, and you might get into fights, you might do things and when you grow older later on, you handle being insulted or being treated disrespectfully much better because you have life experience. Now, you could be like in your early 20s and full of hormones and full of rage and testosterone, and if someone does this to you and you hex them, and then you find that later on that all the children were killed in a car crash or something, are you going to be able to deal with that?
Right.
You know, and this is the whole thing of magic. It's really about building the self identity and the consciousness in a level towards a genuine spiritual enlightenment. It's just like martial arts or anything else that way. Sure. When to punch and when not to punch.
Yeah. Well, it's a good idea to think about when it comes to, you know, the severity of where you're at in your life and wanting to imprint that on somebody else. But to me, it's always been, you know, magic, and you've said this too, it's a very solitary thing. And I think it's more about, you know, embedding the self rather than kind of harking on another individual.
And the solitary thing and the private thing is extremely important. Like, no great artist stood there and created a masterpiece by talking about it as they were doing it.
Right.
You know, so this Bob Ross approach to magic is filled with flaws. You're giving away right away. You know, you're immediately, as you're describing, I'm going to hex this person online or something. You have that thing with the whole Trump thing.
Yeah,
a universal constant leading into that, segueing into that, is that I hear everywhere I go, when I'm in Italy or Sri Lanka or anywhere, that if you hex somebody who didn't harm you personally, I mean, with intent, I mean, you could harm somebody and not genuinely want to hurt them. It could be out of things like a broken heart. It could be out of things like immaturity or stupid situation, or they're a member of some political group or something like that you don't like. But that was not the same thing as personal intent to harm. And there's a danger that that thing will come flying back with you, especially if the person that you're hexing, regardless if they're into magic or anything, has a powerful psychic integration. And it will just, but that energy has to go somewhere, and it's going to come home. And that's a universal constant I've heard everywhere.
Yeah, I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the, was it the Michael I forget his last name, but the the whole Trump
Yeah.
hexing thing, which I think, I mean, maybe arguably, but I think it's pretty clear that backfired pretty severely in a way.
One of the guys who was behind it, a young guy was on TV. I saw him on CNN. He now has a GoFundMe page. He's lost everything and he's practically living on the streets. There's a lesson there, and I've
Yeah.
heard stories of people. I had a friend in England who told me he knew a woman who was like this old elderly hippie lady. Now you could read into this any way you want. Very whipped up in the sort of that stuff. And she literally she got involved in the first public binding one, and she suddenly got cancer and died a few weeks later of a very
Right.
bad. Maybe it's not related, but you still have to wonder.
Yeah, it's hard not to be a conductor of coincidence with these things.
Yeah, and again, people say, "Oh well, his policies affect me." Well, unless he ordered a direct attack on you and ones you love directly by name, intent personally, not really. You're choosing to be offended by that. It's not the same as Dion
War
Fortune
or
and
Fortune, yeah.
her
War.
society. Well, Dion Warco was great too. But, our society of light standing on the great cliffs of Dover, trying to turn back the German bombers because those bombs were potentially landing on her community.
Right.
And
And
so it's very, very different.
was it famously the guy that the Wiccan Gardner?
Yeah,
Yeah.
he was there.
Yeah, he was part of that, right? He was about
Yeah, and two
reversing
other
that.
people, and they both died. And Gardner's contention was that they died because there was so much intensity put into it. A very interesting guy, Gardner.
Yeah.
But World War II there was a lot of occultic stuff, mainly on the Third Reich side, but it was everywhere. I mean,
Yeah.
war does bring that out.
Yeah, and you mentioned too, and I think it's a sobering comment you had said recently where, we will always be in the thralls of wartime.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like a never ending. I mean, maybe some people would look at that cynically, but I think that's just a sobering realization as the human condition for,
I
bad
grew up
trajectories to power,
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Ireland where in the northern half of this island, people were killing each other because of sectarian violence. Now,
Right.
that's all stopped now. The sectarianism is still there. It may be under the surface, it may be a bit more polite, but that never fully goes. It's also one of the reasons I was, became very anti-Christian. But those things don't vanish overnight. You don't anywhere. You see, like the America living with the legacies of things like slavery and things like that. It's frightening how quickly it can change. Now, as regards war always being there, well, you could take a philosophical thing to it that war is an intrinsic part of human nature, that we've always been tribalistic and we always fight. I don't know if that's completely true. I'd be more under the concept of the universe requires novelty and evolution, and if your life is easy going, it will generate conflicting energetic forces in order for you to deal with them and grow as a person and a society and a culture. So I think we're playing out cosmic roles here. I think this is why, in terms of magic, that the thing in terms of military and war is always rooted in that is because it does definitely make people think differently in a different way. Like I was in Liverpool last year in England, and they had in the shipyard there a preserved dazzle ship. Now, what dazzle ships were? They were battleships that the Royal Navy used, and they used to paint them in bizarre colors like pink geometric shapes and just all kinds of strange geometric shapes and colors, and send them out into the German fleet. And what they discovered was that they were so strange to look at that they couldn't hit them. They couldn't hit them as easy. They couldn't bear on them. They were literally, that's what they call razzle dazzle ships.
Right.
And that made me think, like, what, looking at this thing, I was sitting in the shipyard there looking at this thing, and I was thinking to myself, that would have never been developed if it wasn't for war. And then you then go on from that to things like the psychedelic thing. And they are looking at a psychedelic battleship from 1914. And where did that come from? It came from war. Right. And you'll find that probably a lot of a magical practice, like in countries where there's been a lot of history of warfare and stuff, they often have the deepest magical tradition.
Yeah, theatricality I feel has always been a part of that.
Yeah.
It's that, yeah, like you said, razzle dazzle. I mean, there's no one more equipped with it than the Third Reich, obviously, with the super villain oeuvre that they had. Um, but yeah, it always seemed to me that there was like an identitarian thing when it comes to scaring the other side with the unknown.
I yeah, identitarian. That's a great way to put it. I there's a there was even during the troubles in Northern Ireland when I was growing up, there was the British Army were doing things like leaving. There's a very good book about it called The Magical War of something like that in of Ulster or something, where the British military were deliberately going into IRA areas and setting up what looked like ritual magic practices happened in abandoned buildings and houses in
Huh.
the belief that snipers wouldn't go into them. And I don't know if it worked or not, but there was so many being killed by IRA snipers who would be darting into old buildings and factories and taking them out that someone had the idea that maybe we'll pretend they're being used for black magic, and it will the sniper goes in there, sees the remnants of a black magic altar. It's totally fake, by the way.
Right.
But it's not fake if it works. You know what I'm saying? This is the thing about magic. It's like, it's and the intention may be fake, but if the guy walked in there and go, "I'm getting out of here. I'm not going. This could backfire on me. I could get killed myself."
Yeah. Well,
It
it's
worked. The magic worked. It worked.
absolutely. But yeah, and like even to circle back to what we were talking about, like the hexing needs to be personal. I think
Yeah.
there's something to be said with the history standing the test of time. That yeah, even though the Third Reich admired themselves and runic and all these like
Bang
occult.
on. Yep, you're so right. They were doing cosplay on a gigantic level.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And it backfired magnificently because I don't think people at that time understood exactly what was going on. But maybe if they were a little bit more upfront about it, it could have scared a little more. I don't know.
The resurgent Germanic paganism was enough to unleash certain forces that had been buried beneath things like Lutheranism and other religions,
Right.
that they were able to unleash an ancient charge, but they weren't able to take it as far as it could. Now, at the same time, there was a British magician by the name of Maskelyne. He was a very famous magician in the 1930s and 40s, stage magician, not occult. Well, it's the same thing when you get the same result in the end.
Yeah. I like.
But
Yeah.
he did some remarkable things. He moved the city of Alexandria in Egypt. He what they were The Germans were bombing Alexandria, and what he did was he went down the coast to a bay 20 miles away that looked very similar, and got the British military to set up light trucks and to simulate the harbor at Alexandria 20 miles from where the real Alexandria was, and then got everyone to shut off the lights in Alexandria, and they bombed an empty bay. Things like that, which is a sleight of
Right.
hand thing. But the result is he still enchanted the German bomber pilots. It's still
Yeah.
magic.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I think what was I think Jason Louvre had said something about the difference between that is one is enamoring yourself in illusion, the other one is dispelling it.
That's very good. Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah. But yeah, to talk about more about like I think maybe we've hit kind of a mass effect of a culture these days. I don't know if you'd agree with that, but it seems to be everything from the Atlantic writing these articles, which really just kind of dispel witchcraft, and by adding all this woo to kind of dispel the actual spiritual practice of it. So we've just hit like a what do you call it, mass, we've hit the limit, it seems like. And it seems like when it comes, and like hexing is a part of that peddling. I've noticed everyone from coetting on YouTube, and like these fights between people like David Griffin, who's now the arbiter of the Golden Dawn, which is arguable, and coetting going against each other about what how to attain power from individuals. And I just thought it's really funny how it always comes down to money or ascension, and money in ascension.
Which is not necessarily anything wrong with that, if you want to make a living. But in terms of ego battles, it reflects very badly on magic as a whole.
Yeah.
You see, like most magicians, you don't make a lot of money. Most people involved in the deep end of magical practice, they generally,
They're
from Austin,
artists.
yeah, they're
Yeah.
artists. So they exactly like, people say, well, like Austin's Bear and Crowley didn't die with any great riches, but their riches were the fantastic life that they lived and
Absolutely.
the incredible experiences. And this, and if what's his name, Jack Parsons had not been murdered, who knows what he would have went on to do. But yeah, I mean that it's not really about that. I mean, a lot of people who tend to be wealthy and be occultists are generally already have the money already, and then they've made it some other way, and then they
Yeah.
get into it. And so it's not like for that. It's a spiritual thing. You don't become a monk, a Shaolin monk to get rich. Now, there's a lot of this nonsense about this. We've gone into the kind of real end pop culture end of things. You're all right. You're right
Right.
about that.
Yeah.
It's like the Harry Potter generation come of age, and the Atlantic article wasn't the worst of them. And it's also happening with paganism. Have you noticed that? They're also
Oh yeah.
the two things are, and that's me. But the two things go hand in hand. The new sort of American paganism, Druidism, and whatever. A lot of it seems to be an American phenomena as a whole. And then the magic thing. And I mean, they have some people who are. I mean, it was literally. I'm not kidding you. It was literally within a 2-week period that YouTube was filled with interviews on mainstream TV programs from England, Australia, loads from the USA, with like fashionable witches who were
Yes.
suddenly being featured in magazines like Condé Nast and Vogue and everything. It was almost like somebody uh, flicked the switch and says, "Let's put witches all out there and let's
It
give
was
them
like a musical genre that came, to be
boy
the
bands." It was
fashionable
like
thing.
boy
Yeah.
bands. It
Yeah.
didn't really take off though. Did you notice that?
Yeah,
I
I've seen
remember
it fizzle out for sure.
there was
Yeah.
one lady in Vogue that they were like really setting up big time, and I mean, she was being filmed very professionally, and they were trying to launch her almost like as the Deepak Chopra of this stuff or something like that. It literally went nowhere, which shows you there's no magic there anyway.
Right.
But there's no honesty. You're like if you don't have an honest intent, if you don't really believe in it, it won't happen anyway. It'll always be cosplay. But I just found it fascinating that they ran it in tandem with the whole pagan revival thing. I can tell you what there's an element of we can look at the I wouldn't call myself a conspiracy theorist, but I know enough about the world to know that there are people out there who'll try anything to stay in power or get power.
Right. Yeah.
And I do believe that there was whether it was churches, whether you probably would trace this stuff back and find out that it was someone like Benny Hinn or some of these guys who run these super churches in America, who are probably a little worried about their their money drying up with all this growth in paganism and magic, and probably hired PR firms doing then fake magicians or whatever. That's the kind of, if it was a conspiracy, it would be something like that, and it wouldn't be like the Illuminati sitting down and planning to take us over or something. It wouldn't be like that at all. It'd be some tacky business, ego-driven thing. But yeah, I think that did happen, and I'd love to know who was behind it. And I found it very interesting, but it fizzled out. But there was definitely an agenda, like and I see it here in Ireland as well. There's definitely uh, paganism is now very very strong again in Ireland. And
Yeah.
it never really went away, but it's officially strong now. Like everyone's a pagan. Like lots of people call themselves pagans. Or if you ask them, even people who said like a few years ago would have said I'm an atheist, they'll say around I'm kind of interested in paganism. You hear
Right.
that a lot now here, and a lot of I think a lot of that dovetailed into the environmental thing as well. A lot of that kind of thing going on also. But there's some funny things happening here in Ireland. There's like wars between Druids and Wiccans and stuff like that, the Hill of Tara, and they're all suing each other. And it's been going on in England. I heard some unbelievable stories about the Druids at Avebury. They've been doing things like throwing dead chickens on each other's doorsteps and stuff. It's really silly.
Jesus. Yeah.
But oh yeah, really into all these cosplay Druids, and
Yeah.
it's but it is interesting how, but it's out there and it's popular. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
and you see, like, you go around villages in Ireland where kids paint a mural on the wall and it's a pagan goddess almost nearly always now or something like that,
Hmm.
and so it's definitely mainstream. So are the churches or the Vatican or somebody paying PR firms to muddy the waters? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean that's a good point. It seems like because like I said with all these articles, it seems like they try to devalue the spiritual craft with adding in all the deepest of woo with it, and that's not indicative of like really what's going on.
Yeah, like fashionista type things.
Right. And it is. I mean, I hate to say it, but there is a uniform, and I see this in a lot of different um, sects of occultism
Oh, big
that's,
time. Yeah.
and that's just what it is. And I don't want to harp on it too much because, as being a musician and my background in music, it is very genre based in a way.
And it's not the worst thing in the world. I mean,
Right.
I do know people who do dress up and do have the image that have great magical power.
Right.
But they're rare. They're very rare, and they were doing it for years. They'd be in their 60s or 60s now. You know, that kind of thing.
Right.
Like a French woman I know that taught me the tarot when I was a kid. She must be in well into her 70s now, and she does dressed up the whole thing, and she's still going strong. And yeah, and that she was there before anyone else. And then, but the vast majority of competent occultists I know and pagans you wouldn't know them from anyone else walking down the street.
Well, yeah, and that's a good point too. I do believe there's power in image, and I think a
Yeah,
lot of it too within ceremonial magic. That's a lot of it is the theatricality. But I also think as an artist, it's important to represent yourself at all times. And I think as small things like even fashion could be it. But to me, I don't know. I probably exhaustively have a kind of a punk rock attitude with it, where if I see a uniform, I scoff. You know.
yeah. I tend to be like that for the most part, but I also understand that you know a charge can be released in lots of ways. I mean, let's talk about music. You could have like this. You could have a punk band where four fellas are bashing it out on, or four fellas and few girls are bashing it out on the stage, incredibly intense in a small club. You'll get a great charge from that. You'll get a great charge from some like big heavy metal band with a huge stage show, but you'll also get it from minimalist kind of electronic bands like Kraftwerk and stuff.
Right.
There's different ways to it.
Yeah, and I do want to say that I understand how exhaustible it is. It's almost like an immature thing I'm still dealing with from when I was an angry kid,
Yeah, you'll never
but
grow out of it. You'll never grow out of it. I still have it.
but I do see the power and like standing on the shoulders of like the ancestral kind of parts of what all of that image means.
But the dress up thing, I'm glad you about brought this up. When I was 14, or I was 13 actually, my friend and I, Tommy Farrell, went into central Dublin and we were in a record shop. And we were just at the age we were starting to get into proper music. We went from like Crazy Horses by the Osmonds to things like
Nice.
Slade and
Oh, hell
Bowie
yeah.
and T-Rex, big time T-Rex fans. And
Yeah.
there was a fanzine. There was a fanzine, right? And this is probably one of the most magical books I've ever read in my life. That had been brought. This guy called Fred Jaffe used to bring all the records and stuff over from London, and he brought over fanzines from somewhere, some shop in England. This had been about 78 or something, 77, 78, and the fanzine was about punks, and we never heard of them, knew nothing about them, and they had like photocopied black and white pictures of like Susie Sue and people like that.
Right.
And we were captivated. We were captivated by the way they dressed up and the way they looked. So even the punk rock in the early days was very much based on glamoury. Very
Yes.
much, very much.
Yes, absolutely. And I do think, yeah, like I absolutely attribute to even my my practice as being kind of the same ethos, of very like arguably maybe stubbornly individualistic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
Mitch Horowitz talks about it. I think he calls it archaic magic, which I've always loved. I mean, I think everyone should name their own magic, so I don't necessarily think that that's necessarily what I practice, but I do love that it's a potpourri of recipes that are all mixed together, to kind of create a personal trajectory within
Yeah.
this.
Joining groups, I get invited now and again to join groups and stuff like that. It seems too much like the army or something.
Right.
There's like the rule books and everything,
Yeah.
even if they're not like that. And even if, I mean, I politely might go along and might meet people and stuff like that. And it's very nice and everything. But ultimately, it comes down to a statute of rule books or something. And that's just not for me.
Yeah, and I've fallen into it too. I still am a part of an art collective, and that dabbles a lot in metaphysics. It's really about the confluence between art and metaphysics. And the whole thing was, holding up disparate individualistic artists with like a pretty aloof ethos, like one that's supposed to be malleable, supposed to be changed all the time. But even then, you fall into it looking like some kind of religious doctrine, you know?
I have a friend in Dublin. She's a journalist there, and she joined the Golden Dawn there. And then the Golden Dawn there goes right back to the beginning. You mean it's the same age as the London branch, and
Yeah, it's not like the David Griffin stuff.
no, they have a real temple, and they have you're talking about, they have books there by they have William Butler Yeats and A. E. Russell and Bram
Wow.
Stoker. That's the level, Lady Wilde. That's the level that it's at, and it's very difficult to get in. And she said she was absolutely captivated by the glamoury and the pageantry and dressing. She just felt amazing, dressed up like Cleopatra and all this kind of thing they do. But then she said after a while, it was just like being in college or school. It was just homework, homework, homework. And that initial wow factor of being amongst all this soon dissipated, and it
Yeah,
became studious and scholarly.
yeah. I've heard you mention quite a bit about groups and orders, and kind of that being uh, antithetical really to like a true magical practice, which is really just a trajectory of the self. And it's I've fallen victim. There's something about, as being in a band and hitting those kind of transcendental states collectively, creating and doing something like really casting some true art. And every time I've tried to kind of transpose that into maybe doing something with magical means, it's always just burned and crashed. It's like a weird pomp and circumstance of it that I think makes people attuned to something else, when really it's just we're just trying to create art.
Yeah, that's exactly it. We're just trying to create art. Also, magical orders come from a time when there was safety in numbers. In the 1800s, even there was still the Protestant and Catholic churches still had a lot of power, and you could go to prison for blasphemy laws and stuff like that. But if you joined a magical order that was filled with like wealthy, influential people, you were safe. You could practice magic in safety. There wasn't as many books around. There was still sort of racial memories among the working classes of their ancestors have been like persecuted, gone to prison, or even executed for practicing magic.
Right.
We don't live like that anymore. We don't need that safety in numbers thing. So you don't need to have an influential friend runs a magical order. You can do it at home.
Do you think adversity is like a needed uh symptom of a magical practice?
I think it's vital in life as a whole.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was successful in business and working, I was the most useless human being in the world. I look back on those. I look back on those times, saddened. I didn't progress in any way. When I was poor, broke, and had nothing, I was a dynamo.
Yeah, that's funny, isn't it? I mean, we
Yeah.
always hear that. Me too. I think
Same with societies. Same with societies. You compare like the early America to sort of like McCarthy's America when after World
right.
War II when everything was comfortable. You compare that to like the
Nuclear
developing
family.
America.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like I have a friend here in Ireland who always says that comfort does not make good art.
Right. And it like at what a cost for that comfort. A
Yeah,
terrible cost. But I often wondered that. This actually kind of ties in a little bit to my questions about your thoughts on depression, on mental health. I know that you've had some like incendiary posts in the back in the day, on Facebook. But yeah, I would just like to hear what your idea of like mental health is in this day and age.
yeah. They weren't incendiary. They were honest opinions.
Yeah.
It's just that I don't lie to people. I don't do that. And I mean, I'm not a Christian who does the softy thing. I'm not here to. If I have what? Okay, mental health and depression, terrible thing. I have tremendous sympathy for people going through it.
Okay.
What I do, and absolutely I do. I've never had it myself, so I can't say what it's like. On the other side, I have a lot of sympathy for the people who live with these, that deal with it, and no one seems to care. And I have seen good people being eaten alive by whatever made the partner who was depressed, whether it was some kind of force within them. But I've seen it, and I've seen people who should have walked away from a miserable existence and enabling a person who didn't particularly love them, I might add. It wasn't like they were a great loving person. There was almost like a guilt to walk away. And I feel that sometimes, in some cases, the enabler is actually maintaining that person in a depressed state by being, quote unquote, their rock.
So this is a
Now,
tough love kind of thing.
well, it wouldn't be a tough love thing. I'll tell you for something. I grew up in a very poor, disadvantaged neighborhood.
Yeah, me
Extremely
too.
poor, extremely disadvantaged. Guess what? I met fuck all depressed people.
Yeah.
I don't know who said it, whether it was Dylan Thomas or Brendan Behan, but he said it's a middle class disease. There's a lot of truth to that. Now, what's the underlying cause of that? What brings it to that? There's a sense of idleness. Now, I'm not saying deliberate idleness, but there's an idleness of experience and an idleness of volatility within the self. I don't feel, unless you have a child, that you have to necessarily be. Now, if you're married to someone or you're in a relationship with someone and they develop a mental health problem, you must be there for them. You must protect them and look after them. But when I see people willingly entering into relationships with someone who's a manic depressive or something like that, and then 3 years later, he or she looks like the absolute living life has been just drained the fuck out of them, and it's not getting any better, and the person is even more depressed, my attitude is, you're like a junkie. It's time to get out. It's trying to get away from that. And that's how I feel about it. I've seen numerous cases of it in my life.
Yeah.
My attitude towards it is, I wouldn't let a person with typhoid cough on me. Does that mean I think a person with typhoid is inferior? No. Do I think they're out to harm me? No. Do I think that they should not be given compassion and decency and love? No. But at the same time, too, they should be isolated and help them get better and others and to stop it from spreading to others. And I do feel that the same sense applies to these issues. Now, to me, the word mental health is now far too broad. Far too broad. To me, a mentally ill person when I was growing up was somebody who was walking down the street having a conversation at the top of their voice, shouting at themselves, probably with their zipper open and their willy hanging out. Okay, something like that, right? Or nowadays, a person who's extremely mentally ill is someone who's sitting at home feeling sorry for themselves. It seems to be that things like, because of the American Psychiatric Association diagnostic rule book and stuff, they have expanded all these mental health things into an enormous spectrum where basically everyone is nuts at some level. Now, we also live in an age where we have a victim complex. That we live, this is what we live in, the age of the victim complex. So everyone now has, I'm this, I'm that, I'm that, I'm that, I'm this, this. No, you're a fucking human being. You have things in you that need work. But at the same time, too, the whole world shouldn't stop. This is why it's a path of self-awareness. It shouldn't be, it shouldn't be that. So, total compassion from you. You can take it any way you want. But I've seen enough good people destroyed in relationships with people who are depressed to know that it was just like being in a relationship to someone that might be HIV positive. Detach. Somehow, don't live with them. You can still love them. Detach. And that's all I'm saying.
I see what you're saying. And as full disclosure, as someone that has struggled in the past with, misdiagnoses and severe mental health and addiction, I've found personally in my own thing, even like through the practice of magic, which got me out, not subscribing to medication, not subscribing to
very important.
any of that, to be where I honestly sometimes think that I wasn't truly what they diagnosed me as, because I'm fine.
You probably weren't. You got like, we've all go through bad stages in life.
Right. I mean, honestly, I can harken back to honestly, through the study of magic and talking to luminaries and occultists and artists through this podcast, I found a common thread in that it's a it's a lack of purpose. It's what ate me alive was this kind of like amiable, um, like drugs gave me a clarity of purpose, or mental health was the reason for everything that gave me a clarity of purpose. But I don't think it was true. It wasn't
Yeah.
right and it wasn't good. And honestly, yeah, I've been a couple years now of not dealing with any of that. I feel fine. A lot of that is through personal growth and personal, praxis and all of that. But yeah, I do see what you're saying, because a lot of in the addiction community, it's an enabler thing, and they
Yeah,
say,
and depression is an element. There's an element of addiction to that as well. If
right,
and I'll give you another one. I mean, you can. I have no problem saying that many people I know who suffer from depression can often be some of the most selfish people I've ever met. They don't care about anyone but themselves, even if they're destroying their family around them. Now, you could say, oh, it's because the illness makes them that way, but I don't know. It's like it's I mean, it's like these people who talk about it nonstop for years and years on about the illness. Are they really serious, or are they looking for sympathy? Are they looking for enablers? I
mm-hmm.
know, yeah. I mean, I have a tremendous respect for anyone who can live and stay with someone like that. But at the same time, too, to me, the whole mental health thing is just like you said, you're misdiagnosed wrong. What is mental health? There is no baseline for sanity in this world. Are we medicating our greatest artists away by giving them diagnostic uh, tools and saying, "Oh, you've got ZYZIXYP. Here's a
Right,
medication." Are we losing our shaman? Are we losing our artists? Could your depression be a method to have you go into a solitary lifestyle like the Hermit card in the tarot?
yeah,
So instead of looking for fucking enablers, you're actually going to go on a mystical journey. And I've heard that from some people who have recovered and come out the other side, big time. Like, would you rather be, miserable waiting for someone to enable you, or would you rather be what was his name? The guy who wrote Jerusalem, the famous English poet.
Alan
But
Moore. Oh no,
no, from the 1800s. Uh, uh, would you
because he
rather be,
wrote, yeah,
yeah, would you rather be that and then triumph? We're back to
right,
the old thing, the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung, the monomyth.
of course, yes, 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 yeah,
Isn't that a more worthy thing than looking around waiting for, I need a rock, I need someone to be my rock. There's a lot too much that goes on. I've been diagnosed as XYZZPP. Oh, stop it.
yeah.
Stop it.
I know personally, I agree personally, because I don't blame my, quote unquote psychosis during that time on anything but just, my own. Yeah, I was the guy. I was that guy that was holding relationship after relationship that was unhealthy, that was self-serving, that was, it was bullshit. And I take full responsibility of that. I think that's, a major point of, my quote unquote recovery. Um,
Yeah,
then again, I don't subscribe to any kind of recovering practice. I don't subscribe to. It's all things that were unearthed after a purpose was kind of given to me, or not given to me. Purpose I found or wedged out. Um, and I think these are kind of ultimate truths. These are
mm,
this kind of like salient need to be responsible for your life in a way.
exactly. I mean, I've done things in my life I shouldn't have done, but that's it. I mean, I can't take it back. I can modify my behavior going forward, but I haven't done anything horrific or anything like that. But
Right.
I've been an asshole like anyone else has been at certain times in my life and things like that. But that's I've been a decent person a million times more, and I'm not going to. Then I started to realize I was judging myself maybe by one or two things I did, when in reality, it's probably the same thing with the mental illness thing. People are told to concentrate constantly on your depression or on this or that or the other. Now, you said you had psychosis. That's a whole other thing altogether.
Well, I think, yeah, maybe I'm using
That's a real health issue. You should have got help for. I'm sure
well,
you could.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I say that maybe because I too am using it more than it should be used.
Yeah.
But there was a time in my life, very dark period, where anger kind of entrenched me, and I had a very severe mercurial, you know, deviations, and yeah, it was. I looked towards kind of a purposeless existence within that, as
Yeah.
a cynical kind of way, you know.
Yeah, which is
But then
actually could
again,
be very healthy too.
right. I mean, it's made me a better person. Obviously, I do regret. It'd be stupid to say I don't regret anything I've done, but
Well, if you don't
I'm
regret
better
anything,
for
if
it.
you don't regret anything, if you regret anything you've done, you've had a pretty shit life, you know.
Yeah, exactly. But funny enough, arguably, I would say I was more of an asshole. I was more of a self-serving dick when I was medicated
Isn't
for
that
it.
interesting? It's almost yeah. You wonder about other elements there, like consciousness shifting and things like that, or
Right.
possible entities. But like I will never retract those comments. I totally stand by them, and because they don't come from a place from hate or judgment, they come from a place of like compassion for people who've been damaged by contact with them, and that's really all it is. And I'm not saying that
Yeah.
people you deserve to die or anything like that. It's just that you can't look. I'm a chronic asthmatic. I don't expect people to come running with me. So it's the same thing. It's I don't when I'm walking, sometimes need to catch a breath. I will say to people, "Go ahead and walk. I'll meet you up later on." That's okay. That's me. I
Right.
wouldn't expect you must all stop here now because I'm asthmatic. That's the thing. That was my point. Is like there's a selfishness sometimes. Like there's one woman who had my Facebook account shut down recently, and she's been going on internet for years about her mental health issues. She is probably the most self-absorbed, narcissistic individual I've ever known in my life. She is completely wrapped up in herself, totally and 100%. And when she's not some kind of new age goddess, and so it's like that would be the kind of person I'm talking about. Instead of trying to externalize or project your problems onto others, how about taking responsibility for yourself? And that's all I said, and I will never retract those comments. If
Yeah.
some people find them incendiary, tough shit.
Well, I appreciate you clarifying that, but it
Yeah.
reminds me of another thing to talk about, is the deification of people and how maybe unhealthy that is. You know, the
In what
deification
sense?
of just whether it be celebrities or internet personalities, or putting people, making people affect you in supernatural ways without them knowing or attempting or understanding, seems to be extremely unhealthy.
Oh, yeah. Well, the funny thing is, I never really had that. Like I was an enormous Bowie fan,
Right.
an enormous, like, and loads of bands and people like that. And I went to see them and everything, and never like I'm a massive Susie Sue and the Susie and the Banshees and Kate Bush fan.
Hell yeah.
I never ever want to meet them people.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm the
And
same.
I'm amazed by it. I'm amazed by people who want to. I remember like Neil Peart from Rush. Before I saw a very good interview about him before he died, and he said I was a massive Who fan. I saw them dozens of times growing up. Never once did I ever want to go backstage and meet them. The concert was enough. Now I'm definitely from that thing. I don't, but there is absolutely an unhealthy need to hold on to the charisma of someone else and feed from it. And it's I don't know how some people like I wouldn't understand how someone like I don't know Jay-Z or Madonna or Bono, how those people deal with it, because to even get it on a minor level, it's horrible. I couldn't
Right.
imagine what it's like on a massive level.
Yeah, it's worrisome, and I see it too much in a culture, or especially
Yeah,
modern culture. I see it too much. People subscribing full-heartedly to a thinker who, and I say this about cops all the time, and people, talk shit. It was like, hey, man, at the end of the day, they're humans. We are all fallible people. You can't, deify these people as either, super villains or monsters, or it's like we all have that. And it's just funny to me, especially in a modern culture, seeing that happen all the time. I think people are so quick to subscribe, and they need to be shown, or they want to be shown, I should say, and they latch on. It's a codependency thing.
Yeah, and I think when fame happens, there's like an amplification of all the things that exist in your daily life. So, just it's scaled up tremendously. So that's scaling up. And we live in an age where people are famous for nothing these days, having a stupid YouTube channel where they play video games or something, or something, you know the kind of people I'm talking about.
Yes, yeah.
And that amplification is, but I will say something. I have great respect for celebrities who are themselves and haven't changed.
Yeah.
Like they haven't changed, and they don't, like someone like, say, Oliver Reed, who died drunk doing river dance on a pub table in Malta after he'd armed wrestled a whole British naval ship and bought them all drinks and paid the bar bill.
I mean, he's
And
just a hero. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that he lived his life, but that's the same guy he was when he was 19.
Right.
And I can remember I worked in this quite posh restaurant in Dublin when I was a kid, and just cleaning the counters and stuff. And hold on, my cat's got a fur ball. I don't hear that.
Cute.
But hold on, Benny. He's okay. Okay, but and Peter O'Toole was a regular customer, the actor.
Oh yeah.
And I didn't really know who he was because I'd never seen Lawrence of Arabia or anything like that, And he was just a lovely older gentleman. And it wasn't until like someone told me that, that's Peter O'Toole, the famous actor. And well, what has he been in? I never saw Lawrence of Arabia or anything like that. It was just, he was the same man. There was no.
He doesn't wear that bravado.
Yes, he was. And he was very jovial and funny and jokey and stuff like that. And yeah, I have tremendous respect for people who are the same when they're famous as when they're not famous. I think, like, yourself in the music industry, when I was playing in bands, you'd have someone who would think he was some kind of superstar and walking around because he played, like, in a few pubs or something like that. You get that a lot. I often found that the phonies were very easily, the fakes were very easily, and you see it in this scene as well. You see it in this scene. It's the certain individuals, say, on my level within the alternative scene, who act like the shit don't stink, and they're somehow everyone's below them. And yet, like, I'm completely well aware that I'm basically nothing in the scheme of things, but they seem to think they're superstars. You get a lot of that kind of thing, and that seems to be a thing that's inherent in them. It doesn't develop later on. They were already like that even before they were famous.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, like I said, you see it all the time, especially within this ascension culture, within a culture. This, I have all the, like, give me money, I have all the knowledge you need, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's just funny to me because, the more I get into this, and I say this all the time, the deeper I get, the less I fucking know.
But that's a good thing.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of it. Because when you think about it, there's almost like an attenuation towards zero at the end.
Yes.
It's like your life is like the tarot, right? You're going from 0 to 0, right? So you've reached, say, the midpoint of the Wheel of Fortune.
That is like always the tower. Always the tower.
Yeah. But I know less. When you look at the tarot cards, the meanings diminish as it gets back towards the fool again. It's like the world. They all people often ask you, what does the world mean to you? Or what does the universe mean to you? Or what the later cards? And it's like, well, that's the whole point. There's not as much energy towards the end of as you're reaching what Jung called individuation at the end of your cycle,
right,
as there was when you were, say, before you were, say, mid 30s or early 40s. You were like a dynamo of everything. And that's supposed to be like that. I mean, the more it's it's like that song by the Fun Boy 3. The more that I see, the less I believe. That's life in many ways.
Yeah, the lunatics are running the asylum.
Yeah,
that's a good one. But yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I wanted to talk to you too about maybe getting a little more like modern with it. I know that you had studied electronics, and you had mentioned the like confluence of magic and electronics, which I always thought was interesting, especially after knowing like the Leary Wilson 8-circuit brain kind of stuff, and I've always been fascinated too. I was wondering if you could talk more about what you realized with electronics.
Well, electronics is analog electronics is an extension of
Right.
the nervous system. When you sing through a microphone, that's an extension of your vocal cords that have been charged to your nervous system. When you pluck the strings of an electric guitar, that's an extension of your nervous system.
Yes.
So analog electronics are an extension of your nervous system. Now, when I first started really getting into serious looking at magic, this would have been about when I was finished high school and started my first year of college, and I had a load of books on the subject, making sigils, making talismans, and all this kind of thing. And at the same time, too, building electronic circuits in the lab in the college, the technical college. And in the technical college, my circuits used to read differently on the oscilloscope than everyone else's, even though I used the same circuit, the same. We'd be given a project to build a high pass filter or something like that. And the teacher said, well, the lecturer was looking at him and stuff and go, well, you did it correctly. You must have magical powers, Mr. Sheridan, or supernatural powers, as a laugh. And he was right, because my nervous system was directly affecting the tolerances of the components in the circuitry. Absolutely, 100%. And that was a thing that really struck me. It was one of these moments like, wow, that's why some people, when they play an A chord on a guitar, leave you flat, but the same A chord played by, say, an amazing musician, it's wow. It's because they've really channeled their nervous system into it. And so I've always very interested in but not hugely, in the connection between electronics and supernatural magic, whatever. Now, then about 20 years ago, I was I was visiting my parents and they went to bed. It was a Sunday night, and I was just watching some late night documentary on the BBC. And the most amazing BBC documentary I've ever seen came on about 11:30, and it's never been repeated since. I cannot find it on the BBC player. It was about the early days of the development of radio and contacting the dead or spirits and
Like
occultism.
a spirit box kind of situation.
Everything. Yeah. Like how crystals were first utilized, how so many of the early radio people, including many of the people at the BBC, were involved in Freemasonry and occultic orders, and they believed that they could contact other beings or spirits. There's a common term back then in the 1920s.
Sure.
Through and all the developments in electronics, analog electronics, in terms of things like radio and that kind of thing, broadcast systems, nearly always were rooted in the development of things like vacuum tubes, valves, which are very magical things when you think about it, how they work. Yeah. And later on transistors and so on. Now, if you look at electronic circuitry and you look at sigils, you see all the components right there, the potentiometers, the resistors. And so that led to me building electronic sigils by, in the old days, I used to, because I had access to copper etching, I would copper etch them and do things like put power supplies on them to see if I could charge the energy of the intention behind the sigil.
I love this so much. This is like right up my alley.
Well, I used to open up my guitars and solder them between the pickups and between the way like I had a Strat copy, and the way it has the three switches, in phase, out of phase, and then the top ones. Yeah. The top one was wired through that. So it'd be little things like I'd be trying all the time, like, and I'm still constantly doing things like that. I use I know when I create sigils, I use those electronic conductive ink pens, that kind of thing. And cool. Again, I try to see them in terms of a circuit. And my book Sorcery goes into this a fair bit, but not hugely. And like, for instance, fixing old electronic things. I'm always like, I fix all kinds of old electronic things, from old cassette players, radio players, to old model trains. I even rewired the motors on them. I just think there's something magic about that. I used to work with a guy called David years ago, and he could fix anything. Now, when I say fix anything, someone could bring in a Fender, a Marshall head, right?
Mm-hmm.
Bring it in saying, what's wrong with David? Oh, it's not working. There's no power on it. He would give it to me. I'd switch it on, and power would come on. Look in the back. I said, I don't know. I think the output transistors are gone. So
Right.
this kind of thing. This guy David could pick it up, switch it on, and it would work.
Huh. It's like emitting an electrical kind of force. Yeah.
He was attuned to the circuitry. It was almost like he could fix a solder joint by just holding the circuit board,
I
a
love
dry
this.
solder job.
You know, it reminds me, there's a book I read about from Reed Ghazala. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. It's called Alien Instruments, and he famously would circuit band. He's the one that kind of created the circuit band instrument. And he would take old like play school toys and create these alien instruments out of everything. And he had that touch too. But yeah, sorry to interrupt.
No, it's no problem. Because it's personal, right?
Mm-hmm.
I created a magical intention, and this time last year, flying over Baghdad on my way to Dubai, I created it on a book, and held it up over, thinking in terms of Baghdad, Mesopotamia, and filling myself with all these things on the Emirates flight, and held it up to the moon, which was over the desert, high in the sky. And within 6 months, precisely what my intention was, which was, I can tell you, fairly impossible, came to pass.
Wow.
And I made the sigil, of course, from the ink in the electronic conductive ink.
Right. I mean, this is fascinating. So the last record I made used a lot of what I call audiomancy, or like just sound sorcery. And it would be, so I'd take usually cassette recordings on an old Marantz, and I would do these kind of, kitchen sink percussion things to the tape in kind of a transcendental state. Then I would play it with like a guitar just drenched in sound, transcendental states, and I would absolutely like have kind of these fever dreams, and it would help charge the tune, and I'd create these things. It was all analog though, like all cassette. There's something about the organic nature.
Yeah, because it doesn't, because digital only exists on this planet. It doesn't. It's not anywhere else in the universe.
Yeah,
I've seen. Yeah, our nervous system is analog.
Yeah, and I've seen people try to do, like MIDI files, and they would create sigils within the MIDI files, but it seemed to forget that you need sort of a physical attribute to it.
I have a friend in America called Jason, through social media friend, and he started doing things like meditations on Tot tarot cards.
Right.
And he did one. It's on, if you go to Facebook and you see there's a fan page people have set up called Throne of the Lightbringer, the Thomas Sheridan fan page. And he did this beautiful, stunning, rich, ethereal musical piece to the Indolence card in the top deck, the cups. And he's there. And I mean, we need more of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
We need more of that.
I was, it's funny. It was, maybe we could speak on this a little bit more too. As we were talking about adversity, I was going through a really, really hectic time, and it was the beginning of this love situation for me. So a lot of it was like this really empowered kind of love magic that I do with the music. Tarot was involved. I worked with Santa Muerte a bit, who I grew up with. And just this amalgamation of everything within the music, of creating the music. And it's honestly like, I think the truest thing I've ever done, and I just love hearing people like really focus that confluence between praxis and literal creation, especially when they're using, analog cassettes and recircuiting things, and like every little facet is intentful,
Yeah, I saw a few years ago, I don't even like Genesis, but it was a Peter Gabriel Genesis tribute band. and they even had like analog lights, old lights and analog amplifiers and sound systems, and it was just fantastic. Just you could definitely, and even though I'm not a Genesis fan, I could feel the vibe in a different kind of way.
That's cool.
I think, I mean, if you listen to albums that were, I mean, I can remember in the 80s, I don't know who it was. I think my girlfriend at the time, she brought home, it was either a George Michael album or someone like that, the Doobie Brothers. She played it, and immediately the two of us said to ourselves, "This sounds plastic."
Yeah.
It was full digital production.
Yeah. I went to school for audio engineering. Yeah, it's like I dropped out of school for audio engineering, you know?
Yeah, I dropped out as well because I just wasn't. I was desperately unhappy
Yeah, me
doing.
too.
I didn't fit in. I just didn't like the college things, and also it took something that I had before I went there and destroyed it.
Yeah, I guess I found that I don't need someone to kind of jurisdict what I'm willing to learn in a way. And it seemed a bit like not, I don't want to say oppressive, but that's the first word that came to mind, you know?
Yeah, that's what I felt. I felt, and yeah, I did. It was one of those feelings like being in a relationship where this isn't working. I shouldn't be here. It had that
Hmm.
vibe about. It had that vibe about it.
Oh,
And
I saw the trajectory too. I
yeah,
saw like what I'd have to do, the recertification of modern recording techniques and recording shit that I don't like, and I was like, I
and,
came here because I've always just kind of made music and recorded my own music, since I was a kid.
and with me, it was with the digital electronics and writing out this is a not and or and gate. This kind of thing, and it's
Yeah,
like I can handle the early microprocessors, like the ITT323, because you can make guitar effects pedals out of it, and it's still essentially analog.
right.
It's but then it just I didn't want to be involved with zeros and ones, and I think intrinsically I knew there was a dark force behind it, even as a young kid.
Yeah, I'd love to talk more about that because it does seem like the new warfare is obviously in the digital age, and I wonder how much of that intrinsically is just because it is digital.
I think
There's
a lot
something
of
vapid about it. Yeah.
there's a coldness there. If you look at a sine wave, right, from an analog frequency, whatever, on an oscilloscope or something, there's a gentle decay, attack and a gentle decay. You pluck a note on a guitar, an attack and a decay, right?
Right.
When you digitize that through like I don't know, even when you put like analog synths, old analog synths, and you look at them, and even though the sine wave is the same, it doesn't feel this. I can't explain it. It doesn't feel the same. The the sharpness of the wave of the block, and
Yeah.
it creates it's almost like a psychopathic yes and no, right or wrong,
Mm.
this kind of dark and cold. And the beauty of our nervous system, of our psychology, of our state of being is these fluctuation of this interplay, this wave. You go down to the sea and you watch waves coming in. They don't come in as boxes, that Lego blocks,
Right.
and that's what they've done to set sound. They've made the waves into Lego blocks that they
Hmm.
fall over. Now you can compress all the zeros and the ones to create what on the surface looks like a perfect sine wave. But if you zoom in on the oscilloscope and you go in deeper and deeper, you will eventually get to like a little kind of that little jagged pattern where no matter how deeper, like they're like fractals, when you go into the amplitude of an analog signal, there are waves upon waves upon waves. It never gets dead straight. And that to me is the difference, that at the fundamental base level, there is a plasticity
Hmm.
to the analog signal where there's a rigidity to the digital signal. And that's why I think I mean, this is a good example. I made a video on my Beyond Room 313 channel recently about analog sorcery. And I stated there was much more success with electronic voice phenomena that people use, the old cassette tapes, than you get with
Right.
these digital recorders.
Yeah, I actually that was one of my favorite videos I've watched
Yeah,
of yours. Yeah.
and that's true. That's true. I mean, I've been fascinated by EVP and also television, right? You know, this is probably a good time to contact entities on the television if you have an old analog TV, because there's no terrestrial signals out there
Right.
anymore. You hook it up to an antenna, switch it on, and just move up and down the frequencies, and you might get something really strange, which I have. I have a little portable Sony, beautiful little thing, portable old analog black and white TV. And I put my headphones into that, and I can tell you, I know you can say, okay, it's something bouncing from somewhere. No, it's not. There's other things going on. I just have the means to record on this little thing. But yeah, I mean, it's now see, this is another weird one. It's like as we become more digital, do we become less spiritual?
Yeah, I was gonna say there's like a preternatural warmth with analog stuff that it's obviously missing, but like maybe people can equate that to some sort of soul or analogy of that
Well, we
that
get
it's
digital
missing.
people now. There's no. I mean,
Right.
there was an article in the New Scientist not too long ago about this, that there was basically scientists that discovered that there's large numbers of human beings, large percentage of human beings that do not have an inner world.
Right.
And the guy posted this article, the scientist or whatever, posted this to his Twitter feed, and there was actual comments by people saying, "You mean you guys hear your own voice in your head when you're thinking something out?" It was like
Hmm.
one of these. My God, what this is really true. There literally are non-player characters in real life that simply react to impulses, desires, wants, and needs
Yeah, and
rather than.
absolutely affect the trajectory of the physical world.
Yeah, and that happened to me when I was years ago. I was talking to this woman I work with, and she says to me, "You think, don't you?"
What?
I think, and I said, "What do you mean? I think you make you do things in your head, and then you talk about them. So they do exist. There's like robots out, flesh robots,
Like trying to discover consciousness? That's funny.
or an
Or
internal world,
intrigued, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, that's kind of horrifying. Um,
terrifying, especially if they get into power. But then you have to look at things like totalitarian regimes. That's exactly what happens.
yeah, my father is like pretty involved in the transhumanist party, but I think one of the big things that he doesn't agree with is the accentuation of life. He doesn't care about living forever. And I think a lot of the transhumanist party and this like these digital, you know, soldiers in that kind of war, futuristic war, are really trying to extenuate life. And I've always appreciated that with him, is that no, he's just trying to, he's really into the idea of, of a man-made thing kind of reaching consciousness in a sort of way, but also wants it to expire, you know?
Yeah, I've no problem with that. I mean, it's interesting from that point of view. The
Right.
transhumanists are definitely divided into two fields. Ones who are want to create artificial humanity because they've never been human themselves, and
Yeah.
then there's other ones who probably see the health or social benefits of it, who are driven by things like helping people who are severely disabled and things like that. It's definitely. I mean, I go on those transhumanist sites, and it's 50% assholes and 50% really decent people. That's what I find.
Right. Yeah, I think that's true for anything. I mean, especially digitally. And it's funny we're talking about this, especially within magic circles and a culture. I think there's this need to be more naturalistic, and I think people are really striving towards that. Maybe that's why they're more attuned to quote unquote witchcraft or folk magic or any of this. Is because I think there's this inherent need to push against needing to be digital all the time.
Yeah, and it's a paganism thing again as well. I
Right.
mean, if you look at sort of like traditional ceremonial magic, it's very rooted in biblical stuff, really, isn't it? You know, even like
Yeah.
even Thelema has a fair amount of like yoga and stuff like that in it, but the Golden Dawn, it's all like biblical characters. Now I know that ultimately they're just power sources and archetypes, but it's just interesting again how. I mean, I see OTO people today, and I'm not putting it down. Don't get upset. But you don't seem as, I don't know. You remind me of those cosplay druids you get in England who walk around like Anglican bishops. It's not sincere or something. I don't know
Yeah.
what it is. Maybe you should have a go with some paganism or something. Maybe you're hanging on to a foundation that no longer needs to exist or is obsolete.
It reminds me of Austin Osman Spare talking about Crowley acting invisible in a robe. It's like everyone can fucking see you. I always
He was
love it.
Spare was a genius. Spare
Yeah.
was like a punk rocker, but that was like 50 years before punk rock.
Yeah. No, I enjoy him immensely. You know, we were
Yeah.
talking earlier about like I don't have that deification. I talk to friends who allow themselves to kind of be enamored with a person in the magical realm to kind of direct them where next to kind of go and really enjoy that, you know, uh, reverence to a practitioner. And I have that reverence, but I also have that like enjoyment that, you know, he was human as
Yeah,
they
I
come.
wouldn't use a word instead of reverence. I'd use as like respect.
Respect. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I totally respect Crowley. I totally respect them all. Really, they've all done their part. I mean, that's what it is. It doesn't mean you have to like deify them. And that's one of the big problems with Thelema and the OTO is the deification of Crowley. It's like
Right.
it's just too much. It's just.
You know, I read
But
something the other day that really sparked some intrigue for me was, you know, Crowley was an addict through and through. A
yeah.
magician has a little bit more control than that. Like it's just some fleeting comment, but I kind of took that to heart. It was like, yeah, you know, that's true. I mean, they're
Well, a
yeah.
lot of it, William S. Burroughs was
Oh yeah.
also an addict all his life, but this
And
is
he
one of
had
the
control over it though.
well, that's the thing. People automatically assume that someone who's an addict has no control over it.
Right.
Just like the mental illness thing, people assume that they're always irrational. You know, we're all daylight atheists, and we're all like we're all a bit nuts when no one's looking.
Right.
But the thing is, it's control. And you know, when I hear people say, "Oh, Crowley was just just this drug addict who," and I look deeply into it. Well, like me, he was an asthmatic, and that was the way he dealt. I've used heroin, not injecting it, smoking it to deal with my asthma in the past,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
it worked phenomenal, incredible. No, I've never
Lowers
been
the
given any.
breath. Yeah.
It was like a pure clean, you know,
Mhm.
and so that was what he did in his day. So a lot of it was to do with his health issues.
Yeah. I mean, I
And
think people read, you know, Diary of a Drug Addict, and you know, they
well,
think
Crowley
they've
was
heard of it.
also like the first edge lord. He was the first
Yeah,
troll.
it's true.
A lot, he was a he built his charisma through notoriety and through is incendiary is the word he used,
Right.
and that doesn't necessarily mean that's true any more than.
Doesn't necessarily mean it's bad either. You know.
No, I mean, like Johnny Rotten, when I was a little kid, my parents and adults used to talk about him like he was the devil.
One of the brilliant man. Yeah, one of the
John
most
is one of
brilliant
the
men.
most decent, laid back, easygoing, nice men you could ever meet.
Yeah, John Lydon's the coolest.
Yeah, he's just a lovely man. He's a kind,
Yeah.
lovely man. But he was the devil. He was the devil. And that was the note, building the charisma, building the charm. See, when I hear these public things about this guy's a monster, this guy's an asshole, or something like that,
Hmm.
I say to myself, how much is that real and how much is that is cultivated? The professional wrestlers who have an act. You
Right, the
know,
heel. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. The persona. How much of that is true? But this guy, these people are total assholes, and they go home and they're probably like lovely to their friends and family.
Right. And they're necessary too.
Yeah,
I would argue.
I mean, and there's an element of defense to it as well. It's a defense mechanism. It's a shield of armor. Uh, I use every good magician or occultist has to have a shield to protect themselves.
Right.
Mine is satire and comedy. I'm good at it. I know I'm a funny bastard,
Yeah.
and I use it as a way of people not quite able to put their finger upon me. And I learned at a very early age in school that I would not be beat up by the thugs in the school or in the neighborhood because I could tell jokes and I was funny.
Yeah.
And that has served me very, very well all through my life.
I'd argue that I've learned more from, Lenny Bruce and George Carlin
Yep.
than I have from the likes of, maybe even Crowley.
Yeah, many
About
of them, many of
just
them are true shamans.
yeah, yeah, especially Bill Hicks. I mean, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think humor is clutch. I think it's important, and I think it's
Yeah.
important to laugh at yourself when it comes to all this major, heavy, occult experience.
Oh, absolutely. And like Crowley even said himself, the one element missing from the Western culture tradition, probably since the classical age, I'm sure there was lots of satire and comedies in Roman and Greco-Roman and Celtic magic, was the humor thing. That was definitely had been left out of the equation. Well, I found a lot of Crowley stuff very funny, and I would have loved to meet him because I bet he would have been a real character to hang out with, very, very witty and clever. He had that almost Oscar Wilde
Yeah,
sense of wit. Like when the guy from the Daily Express asked him what happened to your shamans, he said, "I ate them," or to your Sherpas, "What happened to them? I ate them." Now he knew that was going to be on the front page of the Daily Express a few days later, but he also knew that anyone with intelligence would know he was having a laugh, and only the most base people of, should we say, lesser consciousness would take it seriously.
I like that. It's almost like a weird psychic filter. He was filtering out.
Big
You
time.
know. Yeah.
And
Yeah, I agree.
that's why everyone has, some people do dress up outrageously and outlandish to protect themselves. It's just some people are human dazzle ships. My human dazzle ship is my satire and my comedy.
Yeah, I really like that point that, kind of directing where the ire of the public will go.
Mm.
You know, that's magic in a way. And I think that's a great place to probably end this fantastic chat with you, Thomas.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that. Thanks very much for having me on.
Yeah, this was great. I hope we chat more soon. And
Yeah.
yeah, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, give me a shout in a few months or something and that was good. I enjoyed that, and thanks for being so candid about your mental health issues and stuff like that.
Oh, of course. I think that's part of my process too, is to kind of just be real and
Yeah.
honest about it. I think a lot of times you find these perfect specimens talking about their powers, and I don't think that's the case.
No, I think the real human decency is to talk about like everything and try and talk it out.
Yeah,
I think there's a lot
absolutely.
of, and there's a real magical power in that as well. There's almost like a transcendental, it's almost like consciousness yoga.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Okay.
it's something that only gets better, right?
Brilliant. So give me a shout when you have to set it and up, and I will do the usual thing and share it around. And like I said, give me a shout when you want to have another
Absolutely.
chat. I'm very easy to find. I'm generally busy during the summer going around visiting megaliths and ancient sites, but until then, I'm easy to get.
Well, maybe you could just mention real quick if you have anything coming up that people should look out for.
What do I have coming up? I'm working on a book about H.P. Lovecraft, and it's basically a fleshed out version of the documentary I produced and created called Liber Providence,
Right.
a fleshed out version of that, and
The
it,
Ion of Cthulhu, right?
yeah, and I was supposed to bang that thing out fast, but now I'm sort of like it's actually becoming very beautiful. It's becoming like a kind of a poetic. It's had a poet. It's developing a poetic cadence of its own. So I just want to let that flow out and let's see how long that takes, rather
Yeah.
than like just rushing it. And yeah, I'm going to be doing some traveling around the world and visiting megalithic sites. Beyond Room 313 is my main sort of like respectable channel. Uh, Thomas Sheridan arts on YouTube is where I'll do all the funny stuff or things like that.
Yeah.
And where I do my vlogs is Open Source Occult TV. My website is www.mossuponstones.com. And yeah, I'm having a great time at the moment. I'm meeting a lot of very nice people, and I'm just waiting for this bloody winter to end. It's been a crappy winter, but yeah, the journey continues. That's all I can say.
Well, it was great to meet you formally, and I'm really excited about talking to you especially when the Lovecraft book comes out, because I know you've got a lot of inherent, kind of fascination with it. So
Yeah, that's a real passion for me.
yeah,
That and ancient sites, and the two of them, funny enough, go together.
yeah, it's funny.
Yep.
It is. Well, thank you so much.
The magical journey. Okay, all the best, Keith. Take care.
Thanks, man. I'll talk to you soon.